Hello and welcome to the TEDx San Antonio Red Dot Cafe. I'm Jacqueline Carmona, your executive producer and host for today's event. Please join our conversation by leaving questions or leave a comment in the comment section and tell us your ideas. Today we're happy to be joined today by our 2018 TEDxAugusta Speaker Jame Geathers. She's the president of Synergetic Virtual HR Consulting LLC and founder and chief executive officer BIPOC Mentors. Jame Geathers is a mother, entrepreneur, author, and speaker, and as a human resource professional over 14 years, she has spent career building partnership with employers and employees. Additionally, Jame is passionate about empowering, inspiring individuals to realize their full potential through encouragement and coaching. When she's not working, Jame splits her time between her involvement with Junior League volunteering, reading, spending time with her daughter and fur babies. And I'd like to join on Jame Geathers. I'd like to welcome her.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on the program. I wanted to start off with just getting straight to the point because this is a very serious topic. Mm-hmm. And for many people who don't understand this, I would like to go straight into the definition so everyone can understand what we're talking about. So I wanted to talk about the definition of what is bipolar.
Bipolar is basically a chemical imbalance in your brain. So it's a mood disorder, and there are different versions of it, like with many other mood disorders, but it's just that it's a mood disorder that is a chemical imbalance in your brain.
Are there different types of bipolars? Can you go a little bit into the different types?
Sure. The basics are bipolar 1 versus bipolar 2. But then, of course, when you really dig down into it, there's different versions of bipolar 1 and 2. Some people can have rapid cycling, which means they have, I believe it's more than 4 events a year. I've been diagnosed with ultra rapid cycling, which means I have multiple mood episodes, really monthly. And the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 strictly comes down to how extreme your mania is. So that's the biggest difference between the two.
What are the different? So you explain a little bit about the different types of bipolar. Mm-hmm. What would be the different types of treatments and the effectiveness of the treatments?
Well, typically what's recommended is therapy and medication. And people feel strongly one way or the other about both options. There are a lot of people who love therapy, but are not really so gung-ho about the medications because, just to be blunt about it, the medications can be awful. And it's never a situation where you're like, okay, I have this diagnosis, I'm going to take some medication and I'm good. That's not how it works. Like, you have to try with your medical provider, you have to try different combinations, and you have to experiment and just see, what's going to work. Something will work, then it'll stop working, and you have to start all over and do it all over again. So, medication and therapy are the two main treatments. There are some other more unorthodox treatments, but those are the two primaries. I personally do both, do medication and therapy. And it's made a world of difference in my life, just taking the medication, one, but combining it with the therapy has made a difference. It's made me functional.
What would you say are the pros and cons of your treatment? Because I know we've talked about it before, mm-hmm. and let our audience know and understand a little bit more about that.
Well, as far as the therapy, I can't say too many great things about therapy. I've been very fortunate that in my life I've encountered some fantastic mental health professionals, but I know everyone isn't as fortunate, and it is, you know, a game of numbers. You have to constantly be meeting different therapists and counselors just to see who's going to be a good fit because everyone isn't. Now with the medications, that is I don't, you know, the good thing about medication is it can, when you get the right combination, it can stabilize you, and it's a very useful tool. The downside to the medications is all the medications have side effects. And then so you end up taking the medication, and then you have to take another medication to counteract the side effect of the medication that you were taking in the first place. And it's never just one pill with bipolar, it's a combination of pills. So you have to factor in there's going to be side effects with each of those medications. And you may end up having to take multiple medications to counteract the side effects of all your medications. There's that. And then on top of that, if for some reason, because I've done this sometimes purposely in the past, other times just because you run out of resources and you don't have the medication or something is delayed for some reason. If you go off your medication, there will be a consequence. There's going to be a severe reaction to it. And that's challenging. And I know for someone like me, it was not only physically challenging, but mentally challenging because I hated having to be dependent on something to function. But it's that's just the nature of it. That's the reality that, you know, with the medication, once you're on it, you're on it.
Have you tried treatment that were unconventional that worked?
Um, no, I am a bit of an extremist. So I initially was completely against medication, didn't want to go to therapy. I was like hardcore, like I can just, and I hate to, and I'm not making light of prayer because I believe in prayer, but I believed at one point I could pray it away and it will be fine. And I didn't need to worry about medication or therapy. I didn't need to tell anybody all my information, you know, I didn't need to do that. And it was a disaster. And so once I figured out that, you know, the combination of medication and therapy was going to work, I kind of just stuck with that. There are, of course, other things that factor in, like change in lifestyle, making sure that you get adequate rest, making sure that you're trying to eat somewhat in a healthy way. I mean, I'm a girl from the South, so, you know, we're not always going to eat healthy, but, you know, limiting excessive sugar, excessive alcohol, things like that, those type of lifestyle changes do help, but it's not an end all. It's going to require the medication. For me, that's been my experience.
So, what have been some of the obstacles you'll say about this disease defining you as a person? Do you think this disease define you as a person? And if it does, what would be the obstacles that prevent you from moving forward and sharing this story with people because of that as well?
You know, I'll tell you, before I gave my TEDx talk, the majority of people that I knew didn't know about my diagnosis. I was barely accepting it. I think I may have, I'm sure I said this in my talk, but I initially, it was brought to me in 2005 that I was suspected of having bipolar disorder. And I was just not even going to discuss it. I was not open to it. And I was just, no. And it wasn't until 2013 when my life was just almost in shambles. And I was just like, okay, I've got to do something. Because at this point, I knew something wasn't right in my brain. I knew something was going on. I just, I was so afraid to accept a diagnosis. And so once I finally did that, you know, it made it a lot easier to understand that the diagnosis doesn't define me. There are so many people with bipolar disorder, and you know, we accomplish things, we serve in our communities, we support our families, and the diagnosis doesn't define us, but it's like anything else, how you choose to deal with it, how you choose to address it, how you choose to let it rule your life, that can define you. And that's hard. It's hard just like anything else. And I would say sometimes with mental illness, it's it's a little bit harder because people can't see it. It's not like you have a broken arm and you have a cast. It's not, you have asthma, so you have a inhaler. It's not something that people can look at you and physically see that you're struggling with this. So a lot of people struggle in silence. And I think that's when it starts to define you, because you stop being who you are and you stop letting the disease be everything that you are, if that makes sense.
I know this disease doesn't really get much attention as other mental diseases. So even me, I had a misconception about the disease, and you brought up things that I didn't even know, when we were talking previously. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that that was a perception of the disease. So, so it's just so many different things that because of the name, the way it's titled, and so it brings different perceptions from different people. Everybody has their own perception through their experiences, their personal journey in life. So my question is, what is your biggest perception when it comes to this, the biggest misconception?
Um, that that we can always control it. And I think that comes from a lot of times people who have the condition, have the diagnosis. We want people to think that we're in control and that, we've got this, it's not a big deal. Sometimes we'll downplay it and not let people know just how much we're suffering and how difficult it is to deal with it. And I think because of that, people not wanting to seem like we are we're crazy, or we're unhinged or unstable. We don't want to appear that way. We downplay what we're dealing with. And so people who don't have the diagnosis, they see that and they think, oh, it's not that big a deal. It's just, it's not like being schizophrenic, when actually it can be just as serious as that. But people don't know that because we're so busy trying to downplay it. Because it's such, you're constantly walking a fine line, trying to make sure that not only are you stable, but you present as stable. Because when you're not stable, sometimes you're not aware. I know, like, sometimes if I'm manic, I'm not aware. And then when I finally realize I am, I'm like, okay, now I'm aware, so I have to put things in place to make sure I don't do things that could be detrimental to me. um, but so I'd say the biggest misconception would be that it's not that big of a deal. And that's something that we have to change. We have to get people to understand that this the diagnosis is difficult, but the disease is devastating. It can be. And if you don't get the support that you need, if you don't get the treatment that you need, I mean, it could be a catastrophic, disaster. It really could.
You said something very interesting. When you're manic, you have some things put in place to help you. Can you share a little bit about that? It's, something interesting I want to know, and probably people who watch this want to know as well.
Sure. So a part of mania is being really impulsive. And I know I get that to the 10th degree. Everything from excessive spending to excessive sexual activity to excessive alcohol consumption. Some people with drugs. I never went the drug route, but alcohol was definitely my friend. And, or not really my friend, I guess a foe that I thought was a friend. But if what I've learned over the years as I've gotten more stable and gotten um, been more proactive instead of reactive to the condition, you know, I have a 21-year-old daughter. She keeps an eye out. And so when she sees me, you know, buying 1,500 things that I don't need, she'll say something to me like, "Are you manic?" And just getting the question brings me to awareness of what's going on, because I have to think about it. Um, things like that. I have friends now that everyone knows. I have friends who are aware that there are different things that I do when I'm starting to escalate, and they will ask me questions. And sometimes just having someone to ask me, "Are you manic? Are you okay? What's going on with you?" brings me to that awareness. Um, and it will stop me from going completely over the edge and doing something I can't take back. Yeah.
So it sounds like you have a good support system, and that's also important.
It's extremely important, extremely. And I'll tell you, for the longest time, I didn't have a strong support system because I didn't let people in. And, sometimes, people are very well meaning, but if they don't understand the disease, they don't take it as seriously and they don't understand the support that you need. They don't understand that, yes, Manic Jamie is a good time, but probably not good for her after the fact. And so you have to not only, I don't want to say educate your people, but I guess in a way it is educating them to let them know, hey, this is what's going on and this is what I'm struggling with. And I know for me in particular, being a Black woman, a lot of times in our community, mental health isn't prioritized, and it isn't looked at as something real or something that is a true struggle, because there's so many other struggles going on, so many other important things to be taken care of and things to be looked at. A lot of times mental health is dismissed, and so being a Black woman, I had to get to a place where, one, I was willing to share my story. Two, I was willing to tell people, I need your help, I need your support. And I know for me, that was something that was very hard to do, to let people in and see what I perceived to be my weakness. Yeah.
Yeah, we did talk a little bit about that, how, people of color, the perception of mental illness is just the support system is not there. They don't believe in therapy, and a lot of psychotherapy, it's even the terms, it's you bring up the terms and they laugh at it. It's not a term, it's not a thing for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. I'm going to say, looking at you, you look very normal.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to that when someone tells you that?
I get that a lot, and I'm like, really? Because I'm like, you really can't see me. So, it's so funny because I remember after I gave my TED talk, people that I had known for years came up to me and said, I had no idea. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point of the mask. Like, we don't want you to know. We want you to think that we're normal. And the whole time we're hoping that people can't see it, because it's almost like when you have the diagnosis, you think like it's going to be bipolar is going to be written on your forehead and everyone can see it like a flashing neon light. And, a part of it, and especially someone like me who may or may not be a slight control freak, I work really hard to appear to have it all together. And that's it's not something I would recommend for other people. I say, if you're struggling, let people know. Don't be someone who has to have it all together, because it's exhausting. Yeah.
And yes, and that's a very important part, because a lot of people of color, they do have that the ethnic people, they have like, everything has to look perfect. What's said at home stays at home, and
Mm.
so that becomes another issue as well. So how would you suggest people support people of color and struggling with bipolar disorder, and especially having the cultural construct that they come from?
I would say bipolar is just like anything else that someone would struggle with. Whether it be substance abuse, whether it be any some type of trauma they've suffered. When someone is dealing with something and they tell you how it's affecting them, believe them. Don't use your view and your life experience to kind of project how they should feel. So if you think that bipolar isn't a big deal, if you think, oh, they're just being dramatic, or, or they're just, attention seeking, or they're acting white, dare I say, um, don't don't go with that. Just know that this is not something that anyone would want. This is not something that anyone would want to, um, between the medication and the disease itself, this is not something that anyone would, want for dramatic purposes. And if someone is willing to fake bipolar and fake bipolar symptoms, just for that, then there's a bigger issue with them. But that's another conversation. I would just say support the people who are around you who are struggling with this, because no matter how much they appear to have it all together, no matter how much they seem to be okay, they are not okay. And it's, everybody has good days and we have a lot of bad days, but they still have a diagnosis that there is no cure for, and they need your support, whether it's listening to them, whether it's, like I said in my talk, asking difficult questions. If you see someone that you love and care about behaving erratically, being super irritable for random reasons, or, going out and hooking up, more than they would. I mean, I'm not judging anybody for what you're doing, in your personal life, but if it's out of character for what they're doing, say something. If you see them spending money that they don't have, and then after they've done these things over and over again, they can't pay their bills, that's a conversation. And it's a difficult conversation. It's uncomfortable as all get out, but it's necessary. That's how you support them. You let them know, I see you and I'm here. And that's really the only thing you can do, because you can't take the medication for them and you can't force them to go to therapy. But you can be there, to help them be aware.
From what you just explained, the whole definition of bipolar and everything else and the stigma behind it, what empowered you to decide to use that and get on the big stage at TED and have that talk on stage? How did you come up with the courage, knowing that there's so many stigmas, so many things behind having everyone know this about you? That is super vulnerable. And so how did you come to that process of saying, this is going to be my talk, this is going to be what I'm going to talk about and share this idea about this disease with people, and share and open up their perspective and mind to it? So that's something that's very powerful, and because it's very vulnerable. So how did you come to that thought process?
Well, what's funny is I've been watching TED Talks for years, and I love them. I love the ideas, I love their perspectives. But in all honesty, and I have to just put it out there, when I initially applied to be a TEDx speaker, I thought there's no way I'm going to be chosen. I was actually manic when I applied. And I thought there is no way. And so as I'm doing the application, I did not have a talk in mind. I knew, maybe something about bipolar, but of course I'm manic. So I'm like, oh, I can do all things. And as I'm going through the application and interview process, I thought there's no way they're going to pick me, because there's so many people with so many amazing ideas, so many amazing speakers. I'm like, this is not going to happen. It was not until the day I received that phone call that I had been chosen. And I was like, oh, so this is real. I guess I need to write a talk now. And it was funny. I knew I knew what I wished I had heard someone say. I wished I had someone who had had this experience and who had shared what they were dealing with, so I didn't feel like I was alone. And um yeah, my when I had a friend who ended his life, and after he ended his life, I reflected on losing him and what, the experience was after the fact. And I felt that I had a responsibility to help other people and to share with other people my story, because they would know they weren't alone. Because I felt like that was the one way I failed my friend. I didn't open up to him. And even though, it was his choice to end his life, and I may not have been able to change anything, but my one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't share the things I was struggling with him and with other people, and maybe it could have prevented it. And so when I, was accepted as a TEDx speaker and given the opportunity to be on that stage and to speak to people who I knew, the people who were coming to that event and the people who would click on it to watch it later on YouTube, those are people whose minds were open and they needed to hear something. And so I'm like, I'm just gonna put it out there. And it was a moment because I'm a super private person, shockingly enough, and I'm also super shy. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna do this and let the chips fall where they may. And that's how it happened. Yeah. So thanks, Mania.
So it has its pros, I take it. It has its pros and cons. So that's good. We have you here, so that's definitely a pro from the manic side. Not that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but you always have to see the positive in everything, and strive to look at the best things in life. Look at through an optimistic scope of way of looking at life.
Very
Um,
true.
so another thing I wanted to ask is, um, you going on stage and divulging this private details about yourself and this private, this moment you're having on stage to the world.
Mhm.
You don't know who's going to see this. You don't know if your future coworkers or people you're working with, partners, business partners, employers, wherever you were at that stage in your life,
Mhm.
and you said it was in a manic state. So were there any backlash to being on this? And because I'm taking it that since you were in a manic state, you wasn't really thinking through all the negative aspects of it, which was great, because that's a good point of this whole point, of this whole, you coming on and explaining what this is about.
Mhm.
So what was the backlash that you received, if you received any at all?
I did, and what was awesome was, well, kind of awesome, kind of not. I was manic until probably about 2 weeks before the actual talk. And so at that point, as I'm coming down, I'm like, oh my God, what have I signed up to do? Like, what am I going to do? And the day of the talk, I almost passed out. And my daughter was like, you got to get it together. You got to get up there and do this. And I'm like, no, I almost went running from the theater because I was like, I can't do this. And she's like, no, you have to do it. You're on the program. So you got to go. And so I get up there, give the talk. And I'll say the only backlash that I received was, I'm a small business owner and I lost one client. And apparently they felt that they were uncomfortable moving forward after my talk. And I'm not sure if it was the bipolar or the hypersexuality or which something in between that did it, but they were just like, nope. And I was okay with it because one, they were a very difficult client. But also, it was, if you want to drop me, even though I do fantastic work for your company, if you want to drop me because of something that I have no control over, it is what it is. So, but that was the backlash. As far as personally, um, and I'll say this, I didn't have a ton of family support when I decided to do my talk. I had my daughter's support always. We're a team of two, but I didn't have a lot of family support, and that was extremely difficult because for me it was a big moment in my life, and it was also a big deal for me opening myself up that way. And even though I was in my hometown, the only family member I had there was my daughter. And so that was challenging, and it was eye opening for me, um, because if people can't love you at your worst or support you during your toughest time, then it makes you kind of reflect on those relationships. But I'm glad to say that my mother, she finally watched my TED Talk last year. And yes, it was a couple years late, but better late than never. And it gave her a whole new perspective on who I am and some of the things that I do. And so I guess that wouldn't be a negative. It's actually another positive. So the only negative would be that one client. And even that, not so much a negative because, yeah, they were exhausting. Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any other final thoughts before we close our program?
I would just say for people who have received the diagnosis, know that it doesn't define you. Please take care of yourself and don't push yourself harder than you can, and let people support you. And if someone it has a person in their life who either has recently been diagnosed, or it has been diagnosed in the past, just do what you can to support them, but also understand that you are not responsible for them. As the people with the diagnosis, we have the responsibility to take our meds, to do our therapy, to do what we need to do. And while support systems are there to, help us to push through and get us to the other side of difficult times, they are not responsible for they're not responsible for making sure that we do what we're supposed to do. So, just keep that in mind because I know it can be a lot of pressure for those support systems sometimes trying to make sure that we do what we need to do to stay stable. And that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is just to be there. Yeah. So that's about it.
And how can anyone reach you, or how would anyone contact you?
I am on all the places, and I love Instagram. So if you're looking for me, you can find Jame Geathers on Instagram, and also my website, jamegeathers.com.
Well, thank you, and many thanks to Jame Geathers and joining us today. It was a very informative program. I learned so much from her. And until we have our next program, see you again.